Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 122. Chapter 122. One morning, Colonel Berg, whom Pierre knew as he knew everybody in Moscow and Petersburg, came to see him. Berg arrived in an immaculate brand-new uniform, with his hair pomaded and brushed forward over his temples as the Emperor Alexander wore his hair. "I have just been to see the Countess, your wife. Unfortunately, she could not grant my request, but I hope, Count, I shall be more fortunate with you," he said with a smile. "What is it you wish, Colonel? I am at your service." "I have now quite settled in my new rooms, Count," Berg said with his perfect conviction that this information could not but be agreeable. "And so I wish to arrange just a small party for my own and my wife's friends." He smiled still more pleasantly. "I wish to ask the Countess and you to do me the honor of coming to tea and to supper." Only Countess Helene, considering the society of such people as the Bergs beneath her, could be cruel enough to refuse such an invitation. Berg explained so clearly why he wanted to collect at his house a small but select company, and why this would give him pleasure, and why, though he grudged spending money on cards or anything harmful, he was prepared to run into some expense for the sake of good society, that Pierre could not refuse, and promised to come. "But don't be late, Count, if I may venture to ask. About 10 minutes to 8, please." "We shall make up a rubber. Our general is coming. He is very good to me. We shall have supper, Count. So you will do me the favor." Contrary to his habit of being late, Pierre on that day arrived at the Bergs' house not at 10, but at 15 minutes to 8. Having prepared everything necessary for the party, the Bergs were ready for their guests' arrival. In their new, clean, and light study, with its small busts and pictures and new furniture, sat Berg and his wife. Berg, closely buttoned up in his new uniform, sat beside his wife, explaining to her that one always could and should be acquainted with people above one, because only then does one get satisfaction from acquaintances. "You can get to know something, you can ask for something. See how I managed my first promotion." Berg measured his life not by years, but by promotions. "My comrades are still nobodies, while I am only waiting a vacancy to command a regiment, and have the happiness to be your husband." He rose and kissed Vera's hand, and on the way to her straightened out and turned up corner of the carpet. "And how have I obtained all this? Chiefly by knowing how to choose my acquaintances. It goes without saying that one must be conscientious and methodical." Berg smiled with a sense of his superiority over a weak woman, and paused, reflecting that this dear wife of his was after all but a weak woman, who could not understand all that constitutes a man's dignity, what it was to be a man. Vera at the same time smiling with a sense of superiority over her good, conscientious husband, who all the same understood life wrongly, as according to Vera all men did. Berg, judging by his wife, thought all women weak and foolish. Vera, judging only by her husband, and generalizing from that observation, supposed that all men, though they understood nothing and are conceited and selfish, ascribed common sense to themselves alone. Berg rose and embraced his wife carefully, so as not to crush her lace fichu, for which he had paid a good price, kissing her straight on the lips. "The only thing is, we mustn't have children too soon," he continued, following an unconscious sequence of ideas. "Yes," answered Vera. "I don't want all that. We must live for society." Princess Yusupova wore one exactly like this, said Berg, pointing to the fichu with a happy and kindly smile. Just then, Count Bezukov was announced. Husband and wife glanced at one another, both smiling with self-satisfaction, and each mentally claiming the honor of this visit. This is what comes of knowing how to make acquaintances, thought Berg. This is what comes of knowing how to conduct oneself. But please don't interrupt me when I am entertaining the guests, said Vera, because I know what interests each of them and what to say to different people. Berg smiled again. It can't be helped. Men must sometimes have masculine conversation, said he. They received Pierre in their small new drawing room, where it was impossible to sit down anywhere without disturbing its symmetry, neatness, and order. So it was quite comprehensible and not strange that Berg, having generously offered to disturb the symmetry of an armchair or of the sofa for his dear guest, but being apparently painfully undecided on the matter himself, eventually left the visitor to settle the question of selection. Pierre disturbed the symmetry by moving a chair for himself, and Berg and Vera immediately began their evening party, interrupting each other in their efforts to entertain their guest. Vera, having decided in her own mind that Pierre ought to be entertained with conversation about the French embassy, at once began accordingly. Berg, having decided that masculine conversation was required, interrupted his wife's remarks and touched on the question of the war with Austria, and unconsciously jumped from the general subject to personal considerations as to the proposals made him to take part in the Austrian campaign and the reasons why he had declined them. Though the conversation was very incoherent, and Vera was very angry at the intrusion of the masculine element, both husband and wife felt with satisfaction that even if only one guest was present, their evening had begun very well, and was like as 2 peas to every other evening party with its talk, tea, and lighted candles. Before long, Boris, Berg's old comrade, arrived. There was a shade of condescension and patronage in his treatment of Berg and Vera. After Boris came a lady with the colonel, then the general himself, then the Rostovs, and the party became unquestionably exactly like all other evening parties. Berg and Vera could not repress their smiles of satisfaction at the sight of all the movement in their drawing room, at the sound of the disconnected talk, the rustling of dresses, and the bowing and scraping. Everything was just as everybody always has it, especially so the general, who admired the apartment, patted Berg on the shoulder, and with parental authority superintended the setting out of the table for Boston. The general sat down by Count Ilya Rostov, who was, next to himself, the most important guest. The old people sat with the old, the young with the young, and the hostess at the tea table, on which stood exactly the same kind of cakes in a silver cake basket as the Pens had at their party. Everything was just as it was everywhere else. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 122. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 122. Consider also that you do many things wrong. Marriage may make a couple one flesh, but they're still of 2 minds. Though the lover's passion may chill, their 2 minds will always find an opportunity to engage in matrimony's most cherished sport, argument. There are various degrees of argument, of course. Marital disputes may lead to merely a simple cycle of misunderstanding and easy forgiveness on the one hand, or, in the more Bezukovian instances, a competitive market and divorce lawyering on the other. In today's chapter, we see the state of 2 marriages. One of the marriages has aged a bit, and the other is brand new. The older of the marriages, Pierre's, we know to be irreparably broken. This is further confirmed by Pierre's disgust with Helene's refusal to attend a party hosted by the newlyweds, Berg and Vera, because she considers that couple to be beneath her. Pierre makes a point then to not only attend the party, but, contrary to his usual commitments to tardiness, to arrive early. It's a standard party. The most interesting aspect of it, however, is the dynamics of the newlyweds. This is truly one of the more humorous parts of the novel. It all starts with Berg, the husband, asking his wife, Vera, to please not interrupt him when he is entertaining the guest. He speaks to her with a sense of his own superiority over a weak woman. Vera, in turn, smiles at the sense of superiority over her good, conscientious husband, who all the same understood life wrongly, as, according to Vera, all men did. This dynamic is a recipe for hilarity. The comedy ensues when the first guest, Pierre, arrives. Quote, Vera, having decided in her own mind that Pierre ought to be entertained with the conversation about the French embassy, began speaking to him about that subject. Berg, having decided that masculine conversation was required, interrupted his wife's remarks and touched on the question of the war with Austria, and unconsciously jumped from general subject to personal considerations as to the proposals made for him to take part in the Austrian campaign, and the reasons why he had declined them. Though the conversation was very incoherent, and Vera was angry at the intrusion of the masculine element, both husband and wife felt with satisfaction that even if only one guest was present, their evening had begun very well, and was as like 2 peas to every other evening party with its talk, tea, and lighted candles. Argument and disagreement is just the way it goes between people with one flesh and 2 minds. The key for the Bergs, for all married couples, is to avoid allowing simple disagreement to fall into the discord of constant recrimination and frustration like the Bazookovs have. To forgive and to understand, then, should be right up there with to have and to hold in terms of wedding vows. Daily meditation. Consider that you also do many things wrong, and that you are a man like others. And even if you do abstain from certain faults, still you have the disposition to commit them, though either through cowardice or concern about reputation or some other mean motive, you abstain from such faults. Consider also that you do not even understand whether men are doing wrong or not, for many things are done with a certain reference to circumstances. And in short, a man must learn a great deal to enable him to pass a correct judgment on another man's acts. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 122. I hope you liked it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down in the show notes below. Tomorrow we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 123. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.